Warning: the radio broadcast you're about to hear was made by men and for men. It may at times seem a little rough around the edges, brash, and certainly not canonically approved by papal authority. But its content may indeed challenge you to become the man, father, husband God has called you to be. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to another week of The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. Hope you are well. A lot to cover as usual, so we're going to jump right into it. I guess before we get too deep, just wanted to, briefly state my position and why I've been covering the news like I have, why I've been covering the traditional Latin Mass most recently, and the closures that have been put upon and the restrictions that have been put upon it over the past year, specifically since Traditionis Custodes was issued by Pope Francis. I myself was a nominal Catholic growing up and into my teens and into my early 20s until I came to a point in my life where I hit a rock bottom. I didn't have much anywhere else to go except for up. And thankfully, a friend at the time who knew of where I was in life, spiritually, physically, mentally, he suggested, hey, come to the traditional Latin Mass. There was a small chapel in Charlotte. It was held by the Society of St. Pius X, and it was over the Junior League building near Freedom Park at the time, and it was St. Anthony's. And I walked in one Sunday as a very distraught, unhappy, soulless individual. And when I walked in and saw the traditional Latin Mass for the first time, it changed my life. I rapidly began changing my life, going back to confession, regularly attending Mass. As a single, young man in his early 20s, I did pretty much a pendulum swing and decided to start from scratch. I didn't really have anything to show for, and since I was on a path to amend my life and start living a good Christian Catholic life, I naturally decided to start considering a vocation. I wasn't sure if it would be a priestly vocation or any type of vocation. I guess coming in as a very unlearned Catholic, when you hear the word vocation, really you typically only think of the priesthood. Of course, we know now there are many different vocations in life. There's the married vocation. There is the religious vocation, which would be to the convent or to the brothers or monks. And then there's, of course, the priestly vocation. And there's some other specific ones, that vary here or there. And certainly some are called to a life of prayer and celibacy, and maybe not in a religious environment, but as a single individual. So I began this pursuit and changed my life and went off and stayed with some brothers down in El Paso, Texas. From there, went and explored a Benedictine monastery in New Mexico, a traditional order. And through that journey, I chose to transition to considering a priestly vocation. Confession was big for me. Confession is what changed my life. I had a real desire to help others, especially young men and men overall, in the sacrament of confession. So that kind of prompted me. So I went on to explore a vocation to the priesthood in a traditional order with the Society of St. Pius X. I went to Connecticut. I went to St. Louis, Chicago, traveled here and there. Of course, as a young 20-year-old, still trying to find his way, hit a few bumps in the road and, kind of paused that vocational search for a period. Went back. I actually looked into the Fraternity of St. Peter, which is a traditional order as well. That was founded in 1988 when Archbishop Lefebvre chose to consecrate 4 additional bishops for his order and the continuance. The Ecclesia Dei Commission was founded, and they formed the Fraternity of St. Peter. I explored that. I was accepted into their seminary. I didn't go very long to the fraternity seminary. But I came out of their seminary and went back to the Society of St. Pius X Seminary and explored that a little further. And, after about 5 years of exploration and discernment, I came out and decided I would pursue a life out in the world and, of course, being open to a wife and marriage and all of those things. I ended up meeting my wife. And, after several years of dating and becoming engaged, we were married. And, fast forward, here we are right on the brink of celebrating our 18-year anniversary with 6 kids. And here I am on this radio show, which is a whole nother direction that I would have never expected to be on. Of course, I've, along the way been involved with the Knights of Columbus for many years, the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas, and even on the diocesan level, working with the school board. With having so many kids in the Diocese of Charlotte school system, I chose to get involved there so I could kind of keep a pulse and keep a finger on, on how things are going school-wise. So, that all brings us to where we are here. And why, Jason Murphy, are you holding this position, especially in regards to the traditional Latin Mass? And it seems like you're kind of bucking against the goad here. You're going against the goad and making a lot of noise about it. Probably, if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see some of my posts are probably not, they're not easy to look at. They come from the spirit of acknowledgement of a problem, of a greater problem, and looking deeper into what's going on around us. We cannot, and I've mentioned this many times, we cannot just sit around, stick our heads in the ground, and say, "Oh, well, I've got up, I said my prayers this morning. Whatever happens, happens." No, we have to actively participate in our corporal lives and our spiritual lives. We can't just lay in bed and pray that our boss understands that we don't want to go to work. No, we have to get up. We have duties. We have obligations. We have responsibilities to our family, to ourself, to our God, to our parishioners that we attend Mass with, to those we go to work with. And so I hold this position because from my flawed perception, there is a great crisis going on in the church today. And many will say, well, there's always been a crisis going on, and it's nothing new. I made a post the other day regarding the smoke of Satan entering the church. And that was stated by Pope Paul VI at the conclusion of Vatican II. And someone responded and said, well, the smoke of Satan has always been in the church. And yes, it has. Ever since the original domestic church of Adam and Eve was invaded in the Garden of Eden, then yes, the smoke of Satan has entered. So we know that. So we're not talking about anything new, but living and being as a contemporary in this period of time, I see things that I'm astounded by, I'm shocked by, I'm confused by, and again, I am a simple layman. I am no scholar, I am no liturgist, I am no canon lawyer. I am a simple layman trying to fulfill my duties and obligations that I am called to by God. So as we continue, we're talking about the restrictions that have been placed on the traditional Latin Mass. So why such a big deal? Why an issue at all? And the more I think about it, and the more I see going on in this world, the more I see how it relates to what's going on in our church. For many years, we have seen a tug of war in regards to the traditions of the church. We know that going back to 1570, Pope Pius V enacted Quo Primum, and in this document, he stated, "It is most becoming that there be in the church only one rite for the celebration of Mass." He very clearly declares, by this present constitution, which will be valid henceforth, forever, now and forever, in this bull, Pius V declared, by this present constitution, which will be valid henceforth, now and forever, we order and enjoin that nothing must be added to our recently published missal, nothing omitted from it, nor anything whatsoever be changed within it. And he concludes by stating, no one whosoever is permitted to alter this notice of our permission, statute, ordinance, command, precept, grant, indult, declaration will will, decree, and prohibition. Should anyone dare to contravene it, let him know that he will incur the wrath of Almighty God and the blessed apostles Peter and Paul. It does not get any clearer than that. That's going back to 1570. Certainly he must have known attacks that would come later or that were happening then upon the Mass. There's always been strife within the church. There's always been progressives who want to keep up with society and with modernity. But this was very clearly stated. So we really don't see any major issues with an attack on the Mass of all times until we get to the 60s. There have been slight changes here and there. There have been slight additions, revisions, but the overall structure of the Mass and integrity of the Mass was unadulterated until we hit the 1960s. In the 1960s, we see this convocation of Vatican II, and the Mass is drastically changed at that point. Nowhere in the documents does it state that it's supposed to be drastically changed, even though many of the prayers are removed, the calendar's changed. But the overall appearance of the Mass was not intended through the documents, at least, to be completely restructured. This all came in the form of abuses and neglect of the true documents of Vatican II. Now, one may argue and say, well, if the documents were so obscure, which led to so many abuses, then obviously therein lies your problem. And that's where I stand as well. If there was more of a protection of the Mass, it would not have been allowed to go on for 60 years, turning the priests towards the people, which was never an approved method. Using the vernacular and no longer using Latin throughout the Mass. The Gregorian chant, and then, of course, a big one, communion in the hands. All of these came along without any documents or any advisements, and they were simply just put into use by priest and hierarchy who chose to make this change. And if you look at what we have now, it is a full abuse of Vatican II. So, of course, once Vatican II is enacted, everyone sort of goes along with it, except for, a few staunch traditional Catholic priests and bishops who chose not to go that way, who saw the writing on the wall. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre specifically, and he was sought out, even in his retirement, to assist those who did not want to go along with these new novelties. So, of course, Archbishop Lefebvre is painted as a heretic, as a schismatic, and this all boils to a point in 1988 when, as Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is getting older in age, and he now has a priestly fraternity, the Society of St. Pius X, that will need shepherding, of course knowing that the church itself would certainly just let it wither and die without any care, he chose to consecrate 4 bishops in 1988. Through this, the Ecclesia Dei Commission is founded, and the church decides to form the Fraternity of St. Peter as an option for those who wanted to adhere to tradition. Of course, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, knowing the ways of Rome and knowing their true intentions, which are now coming to fruition, chose to remain outside of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And so at that point, the church enacts an excommunication upon him and the 4 bishops he consecrated. We know later that Pope Benedict removes this excommunication. Of course, Lefebvre passed away once the removal of this excommunication was enacted, which in fact removes the excommunication from him in both ways. Whether he passed away, if he would have lived, it would have been lifted. So we're talking about 2007 when Pope Benedict enacts Summorum Pontificum, which basically removes the restrictions against the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, which publicly clarifies that the Society of St. Pius X's Masses, sacraments, confessions, etc. are all perfectly valid. So we move into a different realm in 2007. As we begin to see a more acceptance of the traditional Latin Mass, we see a large growth. We see the indult Mass starting to shape up around our country. We see many things moving into place, which would have us believe that there is no longer a threat to the traditional Latin Mass. Of course, now we see nothing more could be truer. Fast forward to 2021, roughly 14 years after Summorum Pontificum, and a great revival in the church through the traditional Latin Mass, Pope Francis declares a restriction against the traditional Latin Mass with Traditionis Custodes. This is July of 2021. No one really knew where this came from, came out of the blue. I'm sure many could have said that the writings were on the wall based on Pope Francis' politics and Jesuit spirituality, which was slightly different from Pope Benedict, who seemed to be a more traditional-minded pontiff. It takes a few months for the dust to settle, and really until the end of 2021, we start to hear rumors about the restrictions, the Holy Triduum of spring of 2022. And the restrictions on this Triduum begin to precipitate down to other traditional liturgies and ceremonies. There begin to be restrictions against nuptials, traditional marriages, baptisms, confirmations, ordinations. And then there's further clarifications that no new orders may be founded, that no new masses may be established, and only the ones who have had the traditional mass may continue. But now, catching up to speed where we are today, now we see even more restrictions. We see the Institute of Christ the King out of Chicago just last week having their masses restricted completely, indefinitely. As of August 1st, 2022, the celebration of public masses is suspended, said a message on the website of the Shrine of Christ the King. And that's not all. The restrictions continue to spread throughout the country. Also coming out last week was that the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia must stop offering traditional Latin Mass come September 8th under the new rules. This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, who we know used to be the Bishop of Eastern Diocese of North Carolina, has decided that his diocese must conform with Pope Francis's liturgical directives. Under the rules, 8 other parishes may continue to offer masses in what is called the extraordinary form, but 5 of those may only do so in other locations besides their church, including school buildings and a former church. Moreover, none of the 8 parishes may publish the times of their Latin Masses in the bulletins, parish websites, or social media channels in conformity with the Vatican's requirements. It's very strange. Can't even publish the Mass times. In a 5-page document outlining the policy, Burbidge says the rules are meant to strengthen ecclesial communion within the diocese and conform to the mandates Pope Francis published in a little over a year ago in his Motu Proprio Traditionis Custodes, as well as more specific restrictions the Vatican issued in December. Quote, "The unique expression of the sacred liturgy is found in the liturgical books reformed according to the desires of the Second Vatican Council and promulgated by Pope St. Paul VI and Pope St. John Paul," Burbidge says in the document. I'd also like to remind everyone the statement that Pope Paul VI said at the end of the Second Vatican Council in regards to the smoke of Satan having entered the church. It really makes no sense at all what is going on, unless you look at it from a spiritual lens, and that's what we're going to look at today in just a second. We're going to see how this is not just a kicking or a bucking of a pope that some people don't like. This is a greater issue going on in the church and our world, and the issue is the smoke of Satan. We know the smoke of Satan entered the first church, the domestic church in the Garden of Eden, and now it is fully penetrating our world. We know that. We can look around. There's certainly enough evidence there to say the smoke of Satan has entered our society, and we can also say that it has entered our church. And this smoke continues to spread even to the Diocese of Savannah. Bishop Stephen Parks of Savannah has announced that the traditional Latin Masses in his Georgia diocese will cease in May of 2023. Quote, "The Mass according to the Missal Romanum of 1962 may be celebrated at the Parish of Sacred Heart in Savannah on a weekly basis until May 20th, 2023. The Mass according to the Missal Romanum of 1962 may be celebrated at the parishes of Most Holy Trinity in Augusta, St. Joseph in Macon, and St. Anthony of Padua in Ray City on a monthly basis until May 20th, 2023. He goes on to state, "I am grateful to the diocese for granting the above permission so that Masses according to the Missalum Romanum of 1962 may continue to be celebrated for another year. Since my appointment as your bishop, I have been present at Masses celebrated with this missal, and I recognize the reverence and beauty of these liturgies." He goes on to say, I am also aware that the eventual cessation of these masses will be difficult for many of the faithful in our diocese. Please know of my pastoral concern for you. Well, that's all fine and good, but what sort of pastoral care will be given when the Mass of the Second Vatican Council is nothing but abuse piled upon abuse? If we were seeing the Pope come out and if we were seeing the bishops enact what was actually spelled out as the Mass of the Second Vatican Council, we would have a different conversation. There would still be an argument because the Mass was still attacked, because the Mass was still intentionally changed for a greater purpose by bad players, nefarious players in the Council. It would create a very difficult argument for the traditional Latin Mass community if Rome would come out and begin instituting the Mass that they state was enacted in the Second Vatican Council documents. If we heard that the priest would no longer be facing the parishioners and on display like an actor and would be facing the altar and tabernacle, as is appropriate by a priest offering sacrifice, and communion would no longer be placed in people's hands, and Latin would return as the language, and many of the other abuses that have fallen into place, including other liturgical roles like Eucharistic ministers and lectors and altar servers, we would see a more difficult argument for the traditional Latin Mass community. However, that does not appear to be what is happening. It seems to me that we're trying to codify a 1960s brand of kumbaya worship service and require that the faithful be subjected to it. Well, I can tell you the faithful aren't going to go along with it. Your nominal Catholics, and majority of Catholics who do not even believe in the real presence of the Blessed Sacrament or requirement for weekly attendance at Mass or belief in the tenets of our faith, including the sanctity of life and marriage, they aren't going to care. And it can be argued that these people are not even truly Catholic. They may be baptized Catholic, but they are not Catholic in action. If their actions do not reflect their beliefs, then I would say it would be arguable for many of these documented numerical Catholics to even be considered practicing or faithful. Whereas when you have the traditional Latin Mass community, they are faithful. They do believe. They want to believe. They want to be obedient. And now they're being put in a situation that is very difficult. Number one, you have a pope who's going against other popes. He's going against his predecessor. He's going against many other popes throughout the ages who have codified the traditional Latin Mass. As we see a formation of aggression by China surrounding Taiwan, I believe we can also see a formation of aggression from the church authorities in Rome surrounding the island of the traditional Latin Mass community. Shots are being fired, restrictions are being implemented, and the faithful are going to be forced to make a decision. I speak for no one but myself, but I know that I am not going to put my family in a position where the faith and belief of their children is going to be marred. Reject the main by exposure to abuses and disregard for traditions, orthodoxy, and reverency, which are readily available at a traditional Latin Mass. We're coming up on our first break, and we'll be right back. This is Jason Murphy for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas and the Obligation Radio Show here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. Catholic Radio is live and on the air at AM 1270, broadcasting from Belmont, North Carolina to the Charlotte regional area. Carolina Catholic produces more local content than most Catholic radio stations across our country. Tune in on air, online, on demand, and anytime at www.carolinacatholic.org. Make sure to catch the 2022 Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas replays each Saturday afternoon starting at 3 p.m. You can catch Keith Nestor, Tim Staples, Dr. Ray Garundi, our own Dr. John Aquaviva, and find out what the buzz is all about for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas. Also, make sure to tune in to the featured men's shows on Carolina Catholic, Faith and Sport with Dr. John Aquaviva, airing on Mondays at 5 p.m. and on demand, The Remnant with Stephen Thomas, Bill Snyder, and Ray Haywood, airing on Saturdays at 5, and my show, The Obligation, which airs at 5 p.m. on Fridays. Catch all of these shows and more at AM 1270, on air, online, and over the app at www.carolinacatholic.org. Once again, this has been Jason Murphy. God bless, and Esto Vir.
Did you know that 90% of older adults wish to stay in their home as they age? Aging in place has many benefits. It tends to improve quality of life, which in return improves physical health. Also, retaining independence as we age is critically important to our mental health. Hi, my name is Meredith Stignan, and I am the president of Harmony Home Solutions and an active parishioner of St. Patrick Cathedral. We are your trusted partner for aging in place. We strive to enhance the lives of older adults and their families by providing premier aging-in-place and universal design lifestyle solutions that increase safety beautifully. Now is the time to get your aging-in-place plan in order with Harmony Home Solutions. Visit our website today at hhsclt.com. Again, that's hhsclt.com. Or give us a call at 980-220-8821. Again, that's 980-220-8821. We want to help you live an empowered and beautiful life.
And welcome back to The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. Thanks for sticking around. We were just talking about the decisions that many traditional Catholics are going to have to make if we see a full eradication of the availability of the traditional Latin Mass. We know that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre's reasoning behind not going along with the Fraternity of St. Peter and the Ecclesia Dei Commission was that he saw the writing on the wall that is now coming to fruition, that Rome has the ultimate say-so when they can restrict the availability of the traditional Latin Mass. Is it arguable that they even have this power and this ability to prohibit it? That's a great argument. That's the one that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre stood up against, and he came to be proven correct. And through that, the traditional Latin Mass had been preserved for 60 years. Now, we come upon a time where a more progressive and modernist pontiff has decided that it doesn't work with his quote-unquote church. Well, unfortunately, it's not his church. It's our Lord Jesus Christ's church, founded upon Peter, handed on in tradition throughout the ages, and unadulterated until ultimately the 1960s. So as we have this positioning and this posturing by Rome surrounding the island, you could say, of the traditional Latin Mass community, the traditional Latin Mass community is now going to have to make a decision. Will they go to the Society of St. Pius X chapels once the availability of the diocesan or parish level traditional Latin Mass is available? That's to be determined. But I know that many have already made that move. I state that I will not continue to send my own family to churches that will cause scandal and be a potential conflict to my children's true understanding of the faith. I stand the same way with Catholic schools. If Catholic schools are not holding the Catholic line, then I'm not going to send my kids to a Catholic school simply because it is Catholic in name. We've been very much opposed to technology being at the hands of our children, so they have very limited access to our home computers and maybe using mom or dad's cell phone. They do not have their own cell phones. I know most kids out there, now under the age of 12, closer to age 10, have cell phones. So parents are willingly putting access to all sorts of scandal and all sorts of perversion and all sorts of bad material that children are not prepared for and should not be able to access online. I want to be the first cause of my children's knowledge of things of the world. I do not want the world teaching my child. And so I speak of that technology being put in my children's hands if proper safeguards aren't enacted by our school systems, our Catholic school systems. Thankfully, our diocese does a really good job. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to pay attention, and I'm not going to follow up, and I'm not going to talk to my children. I'm not going to explore some of the devices that maybe the school sends home with them, knowing that most Catholic schools in the upper levels start to send home laptops. We've had instances where things just weren't blocked that maybe no one would have thought to block them. But again, it's being put in my child's hands, and I'm not going to risk my child's purity and morality to send my child someplace that is supposed to be raising them in the true knowledge of the faith. It goes the same with churches. I'm not going to bring my family, bring my kids to a church that has no respect or understanding for the Blessed Sacrament. That sounds very strong. That sounds very extreme, but it exists. It's out there. Take a look online. Look up clown masses. Look up liturgical abuse. Look at what the Holy Father just participated in, a so-called smudging ceremony up in Canada with Native Indians of Canada. There's a lot of questions there. The Pachamama statue being used in the Amazon Synod. Take a look at the liturgical dances. Cardinal Cupich of Chicago participated in many. Cardinal Gregory participating in liturgies that condone same-sex attraction and same-sex unions. There's many of them out there. This isn't hidden in the dark web. You can easily go online and Google liturgical abuse and look up some of these things and see what's going on. Most Catholics don't know what's going on because they're just trusting in their local churches, which we should be able to do. But unfortunately, that is not where we are. We just spoke about it last week. The priest in Milan, Italy, who offered a mass shirtless in the ocean on an inflatable raft in front of scantily dressed boys and girls, high schoolers. Why would a priest even consider that? Obviously, he has not been properly formed, and that's nothing new. So the battle lines have been drawn. I'm not sure what the local priests and the local bishops and the archbishops and the Holy Father think, but the traditional Latin Mass community is going to stand their ground. The faith is that important to them. And once again, we bring up this whole spirit of Vatican II and this synodality in the church. We know that Pope Francis recently was in Canada and he spoke out against traditionalists. And according to an article in LifeSite News, responding to a question about his synodal vision of the church, Pope Francis rejected the concept that synodal was a way to describe the church, attesting that the two words were equivalent. Look, it bothers me that the adjective synodal is used, as it were, the latest quick fix for the church, he said. When one says synodal church, the expression is redundant. The church is either synodal or it is not church. That is why we have come to a synod on synodality to reiterate this. Praising the Church of the East for having preserved its synodal tradition and criticizing the Church in the West for having lost it, Francis said that a synod is not a parliamentary meeting nor a committee. Instead, he says, it is the expression of the Church where the protagonist is the Holy Spirit. If there is no Holy Spirit, there is no synod. And as a reminder, the Church is currently in the midst of the Synod on Synodality, called by Francis and running from 2021 to 2023 as a part of a listening process to understand how God is calling us to be as the Church in the third millennium. He orders that the Church must listen to people who have left the practice of the faith, people of other faith traditions, and people of no religious belief. And he concludes by stating, the moral and liturgical traditionalism in the Church is part of a dead memory. How can you say this about 1,500 years of church history and tradition, and stating that we must listen to people who have left the faith and people from other faith traditions and people of no religious belief, but we don't listen to the traditional Latin Mass community? We don't listen to their needs, their spiritual needs? How is that? We've already seen a condemnation from Rome for the German Synod, which has gone completely off the rails, but still we're pushing this idea of synodality and ministering to all of these other groups of people, including non-Catholics. But we're ignoring the ones standing right beneath your nose. And this is where I want to make one of my famous analogies. The other night, my wife and I ran across a documentary on Amazon Prime called Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was a movie written by Larry Elder. Larry Elder is a self-described libertarian. He's a talk show host, an author, politician, and an attorney, and he hosts the Larry Elder Show based in California. But the documentary Uncle Tom, it is an oral history of the American black conservative. It features many interviews and conversations with other notable conservatives such as Robert Woodson, Stephen Broden, Herman Cain, Colonel Allen West, and Candace Owens. There's also some footage of Ben Carson, Thomas Sowell, and Shelby Steele. It goes in great deal to lay out the war on poverty legislation that started in the 1960s, introduced by then President Lyndon B. Johnson. It basically wanted to enact prosperity by the institution of welfare. From the film's website, the overview states, in a collection of intimate interviews with some of America's most provocative black conservative thinkers, Uncle Tom takes a different look at being black in America. Featuring media personalities, ministers, civil rights activists, veterans, and a self-employed plumber, the film explores their personal journeys of navigating the world as one of America's most misunderstood political and cultural groups, the American Black Conservative. In this eye-opening film, from director Justin Malone and executive producer Larry Elder, Uncle Tom examines self-empowerment, individualism, and rejecting the victim narrative. Uncle Tom shows us a different perspective of American history from this often ignored and ridiculed group. So without going into too much great detail, because I want to kind of stick to my point where the analogy is going to be made, Uncle Tom basically shows the attack on the family, especially in the African American community. This victimhood mentality, it talks about the marriage rate amongst blacks was some of the highest prior to the 1960s. The number of fathers in homes and business owners and successful blacks were much higher in the years predating this welfare and war on poverty. Of course, this is a very controversial statement. I understand that. The biggest piece that I got out of this was that the United States government wanted to create this welfare system which basically took away the incentives and the guidelines that most people were following to obtain success in our country. So obviously, wanting to give prosperity to everyone is great. Okay, that's wonderful on the surface. When it goes about by dismantling the method and the whole order of how you obtain that prosperity, you have a major problem. That was the defining moment of this film. There's a lot more good information in there, and I'm skipping way over the majority of it to make this one single point. The damage done by the United States to the African American community through this welfare system de-incentivized generations of Americans to get out and work on their own and to strive for success and to have motivation to put themselves in a better state. I've gone into my own experience of motivation in my own life. When I came out of the seminary, I moved back in with my mom. She said, you had 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, she said, you got to go. I said, I don't have a place to go. She said, you got to go. Went on to a local newspaper, found people looking for roommates. I moved in. It was a couple of Egyptian brothers who were very nice. I moved in, but I wanted more than that. If I would have been able to stay in my mom's house, I probably wouldn't have moved out. I probably wouldn't have gone back to school and I probably would have never wanted anything more. I would have stayed. I would have been happy. Maybe I would have gone out, but I would have never had that incentive to get out and do it for myself. And through welfare and through victimhood and through this so-called war on poverty, we have taken away the incentive on so many Americans to do more and be better. So my connection is this. It's very interesting to look at the time frame. If you look prior to the 1960s and you see the successes and the advancements made by the African American community through determination, hard work, long-suffering, they had made it a long way. And then a roadblock was placed in front of them. So as we know that Satan strikes, and he knows when and he knows where to strike, I made this correlation. And it struck me. Of course, my mind's been around the 1960s for the past several months as we've been discussing the restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass. But if we look from a cultural perspective and echoing the theme that the smoke of Satan entered the domestic church in the Garden of Eden, and through that, all disruption came from there. If we look at the 1960s, the smoke of Satan also penetrated the church while he was also penetrating our political world. While the politicians were trying to create this false sense of prosperity by handing it down directly from the government and taking away incentive and motivation for people to go out and work for it themselves and typically do a lot better than what the government's going to do for them, the church was doing the exact same thing with its liturgy. The ecumenical intentions of the Second Vatican Council were, on paper, to bring the church to the world. So how do you do that? You have to take down some of the walls. You have to take down some of the formality and rigidity. So in an attempt for the church to bring this spiritual prosperity to the world, they dismantled that which made it desirable. So you've removed the incentive for people to seek that which is holy. So basically, while the church was doing this, they demotivized and de-incentivized people to seek the higher things because they are the higher things. They have created a welfare system with the sacraments, with the liturgy, so that now it is taken for granted. It has demotivated people to truly strive for holiness. It has made the liturgy more appealing to the world. But in doing so, it has done itself a great disservice in removing all of the great solemnity and beauty of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So these two things going along at the same time are very much done in the same exact way. Satan is very intelligent and knows what he's doing, but ultimately he did choose hell over serving our Lord. So that's why I question his true intelligence. But it does not make me question his motives or methods, because he struck the same with the church and with society. While he took away the natural order of things on the physical level, hard work, determination, long-suffering to obtain something. It's like participation trophies. Well, they're not worth anything, right? Compare the worth of a participation trophy versus a championship trophy. Most people never obtain a championship trophy. Anybody can obtain a participation trophy. Most people will not start their own business, but the value of your own business supersedes that of which is handed to you. The church has done the same. We now have a liturgy that's been flayed and torn apart and handed to society, and now it is being rejected. And what remains to be the one that the true people of God are seeking? The traditional Latin Mass, the traditional, solemn, reverent, Orthodox Latin Mass. And I go even further with the analogy, even while I'm sitting here speaking about this. I would think that the black conservatives who have spoken out against this, and they've been ostracized, and thus the name of the movie, Uncle Tom, because that's the name given to anyone who goes against the democratic, liberal, progressive system by other blacks specifically, as turncoats, and the title character of Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which today is used as a derogatory term for black people as a traitor race, amongst other things, because they're speaking the truth. They are calling it like they see it. They are using statistics, facts, historical evidence to show that what the U.S. government did to their race of people has been a disservice. And now I make a similar comparison with the traditional Latin Mass community and the black conservatives. They are ostracized. They are looked at as second-class citizens, as turncoats from the church, as resistors, as restorationists, as the Holy Father refers to them, because they do not go along with what the church is trying to sell them. Just like these black conservatives have done a great job in presenting very factually based historical evidence that the welfare idea and the war on poverty did not work and has only been a disservice to their race. Vatican II has done a disservice to Catholics. It continues to do so, and the more Catholic you are, the more you're going to be affected by this. I'm not saying that there aren't very good and holy Novus Ordo Catholics out there. No way, no how. Don't mix my words up. I'm saying that what the church did in the 1960s was a disservice to the church as a whole. And now those who have adhered to what was common practice and standard operation for the church for 1,500 years are now being looked at as enemies of the state, enemies of the church. The more I think about it and the more I look at it from a bird's eye perspective, zooming in on 1962, on when all of this took place, it makes perfect sense. And it affects millions upon millions of souls. We're coming up on our next break. We're going to take a few minutes and be right back. And you're back listening to The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. So glad you are here. We've just been kind of talking about the 1960s, looking at the attack on our culture, society, specifically based upon a recent documentary called Uncle Tom that is now available on Amazon. This was written by conservative black Larry Elder, features the likes of Candace Owens, Dr. Herman Cain, Colonel Allen West, and many more. Basically looking at the 1960s and what the liberals and Democrats did by creating a welfare system and de-incentivizing specifically blacks and indoctrinating them into a spirit of victimhood in order to obtain votes for the Democratic Party. There's a lot there. Don't take my word for it. Watch it yourself and then form an opinion. I'm just giving you mine. I'm just taking it for what it's worth. But you can find more about this documentary, Uncle Tom, at www.uncletom.com. They've actually got a part 2 coming out soon. Very interesting, so I'm going to have to tune in and check that one out. But I was just making the connection. By this false spirit of poverty and welfare and a population's dependence upon a government to be successful, the United States government create this false sense of prosperity. And in doing so, they removed incentives, they removed guidelines, they removed the natural progression and order which allows a person to be successful and to seek higher things. The church did the same thing in the 1960s. An attempt to provide this prosperity, not an earthly prosperity or a physical or monetary prosperity, but, in its so-called attempts to deliver this spiritual prosperity to the world, it has dismantled itself. And now, you have what we have. You've got this church for the night, this church for the past 60 years, which has heaped abuse upon abuse. There's no consistency in the sacraments or liturgies if you go one church to the other, whereas prior to Vatican II, you could go to any mass in the world and it would be 90% the same, at least. I'm sure you'd have a little cultural deviation here and there, but the rules and guidelines for the offering of mass were very strict prior to the 1960s. So you wouldn't see a substantial different rite or some sort of, open dialogue worship service prior to the 1960s. And now you've got everything but that. To hammer some of this home regarding what the church has done to its faithful, I've already talked about the beliefs and the stances of the traditional Catholics. If you look at the polls and the statistics of traditional Latin Mass attendees, they adhere to, overwhelmingly 90+%, adhere to the tenets of the faith. And there's no ambiguity there. But looking at a recent article from the Remnant newspaper, which is actually an EWTN survey of Catholic mood about the midterms, there's a lot of statistics here that really make you wonder what happened during Vatican II to Catholics. And some of those statistics here, I'll just go through, and these can all be found on EWTN. This wasn't a traditional Latin Mass community Pew Research or anything. This is straight from EWTN, which is pretty mainstream for the Catholic Church. Some of these statistics here. Overall, 20% of Catholics accept all of the teachings of the Church. 20%? 35% accept most of the Church's teachings, and the rest do not accept some of the key teachings. That's 27% roughly. Say it has only a minor influence on their lives. That's a travesty. Overall, 20% of Catholics accept all of the teachings of the Church. 35% accept most of the Church's teachings, and the rest do not accept some of the Church's teachings, which would be 27%. And say it only has a minor influence of their lives, 15%. or consider themselves to be former Catholic, 3%. Only 37% of Catholics go to confession at least monthly or yearly, while 35% never go. 50% believe in the real presence, and 38% see the bread and wine as mere symbols, and 12% just don't know. And finally, 65% of Catholics believe in purgatory, 77% believe in hell. None of this is a surprise. None of it's a surprise. There's one more here further down. Catholic voters are evenly split between the parties, as 44% indicate support for Republican candidate in their district, and 43% support the Democrat, with 13% unsure. There is, however, a difference among Catholics when looking at results broken out on how often they attend Mass. Weekly Mass attendees support the Republican candidate in their district by a margin of 47-41, while those who attend monthly or yearly are split 43 to 42% Democrat, and those who attend less than yearly or never support the Democrat candidate 48 to 40%. Finally, those of us who do not reject any Catholic teachings vigorously oppose the Democratic platform. So this basically says the more Catholic you are, the less you're going to support the Democratic platform. They're not compatible. It's not possible. You cannot support abortion and same-sex marriage and divorce and all of the other things that go along on the top of the list and consider yourself Catholic. It's not possible. If you believe those things, you need to consult a priest, a good priest, or you need to do some research and you need to get back to confession. Because it is impossible if you're a Catholic to support abortion. I'm sorry, it's very strong, but it's a fact. You're either with the church or you're against the church. Our Lord says it clearly. Luke chapter 11, verse 23, "He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters." So what is the spirit of Vatican II? If the spirit of Vatican II is fallen away Catholics and Catholics who don't believe, then I guess it's very successful. But if you're trying to state to the world and to the church that the spirit of Vatican II is a new life, breathing great invigoration into the church and to the faith and to the faithful, you're wrong. It hasn't worked. It's not working. It's not going to work, no matter how many synod meetings you have to determine what's wrong with the church. What's wrong with the church is that the church has tried to keep pace with society, and as long as it stays at that pace, it will never bounce back. It has been promised that the gates of hell shall never prevail against the church. And the church exists, like I said before, if one person stays faithful. There may not be a faithful priest, there may not be faithful popes, but as long as the faith is held purely by one individual, the gates of hell shall not prevail. So what are you gathering? Who are you gathering with? Are you gathering with Christ? Are you spreading the faith, planting good seeds, fertilizing the soil, watering it with good intentions and prayer life and example to others? Or are you scattering? Because you can't do both. You're either with him or you're against him. You're either planting and nourishing and harvesting, or you're destroying. That's extreme. But so is heaven and hell. Christ says again in Matthew 10, chapter 34, "Do not assume that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." This is not to say that he came to divide, but his word and his statement and his teachings will divide. And if ever our world and our church has been divided, it is now, my friends. It is now. I encourage you all to examine your prayer life, examine your beliefs. Take a look at where you stand, line them up with the church's beliefs and the church's tenets and teachings. If they're not in alignment, pray about it. Ask our Lord to guide you, because he will not leave you astray. We are called to be one holy, Catholic, and apostolic. There's no other way. There's a lot of great resources out there. I've already mentioned many times Mass of the Ages. You can go to latinmass.com. It will break down the last 60 years of Vatican II and show you what exactly happened. Again, we have the sweet holy science. We have the statistics. We have the facts. These are not assumptions and theories. These are facts. This is what has happened. If I tell you I'm going to do something and the exact opposite happens, are you going to trust and believe in what I tell you? The church may be saying one thing, and they may be saying that Vatican II stands for this, stands for that, and the documents read this, and the documents read that, but in fact, what they are doing is harming the faith and harming the church. And until we can all unite and stand up and speak out against what's going on, then we will indeed be victims to circumstances. But when we stand with our Lord and stand for justice, truth, and righteousness, we are no longer victims, but we are conquerors. We have a great new show debuting on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. It is The Voices of Tradition. The name of the show is Trad Talk Radio. It's going to be hosted by Brian Williams, who is one of the founders of the Charlotte Latin Mass community, and our friend Frank Kona, who himself is a devotee to the traditional Latin Mass. So stay tuned for that. That is forthcoming. And coming up on Friday, September 2nd at St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church, there'll be a wonderful talk by Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. He'll be speaking about the primacy of tradition and obedience to the truth. Again, that's Friday, September 2nd, the Aquinas Hall at St. Thomas Aquinas in North Charlotte. Starts at 5:30 with cocktails, meet and greet, and then there'll be a 7 p.m. lecture. 7:45 will be a panel discussion, time for questions and answers, and followed by a book signing. The lecture will be a sequel to Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's talk and build up to his new book, True Obedience in the Church. The panel will be answering questions about the future of the Latin Mass, and it will be moderated by Brian Williams. The event is free, and all are invited to meet and greet reception prior to. More information on that event and local Latin Mass times at charlottelatinmass.org. I appreciate you sticking around, and I look forward to speaking with you next week when we sit down with Father Colin Blatchford from Courage International. Hope you have a great week. God bless, and Esto Vir. If you enjoyed this episode and have any questions or comments or would like to come on the show and discuss your faith walk or any issue regarding the Catholic Church, send us an email at feedback@theobligationshow.com. You can also catch all of our previous episodes and all of the shows of Carolina Catholic Media at www.carolinacatholic.org. Click that donate button and we'd greatly appreciate it. There are also many opportunities to sponsor the show, the radio station, and the Catholic Men's Conference. Join Sensus Fidelium, Harmony Home Solutions, and Wallach Investments, who have pledged their funds to help keep Catholic radio on the air and relevant. Sensus Fidelium is a collection of Catholic homilies, apologetic videos, and other resources to grow in one true faith. They can be found online at www.sensusfidelium.com. Wallach Investment, LLC is a strategic moral investing firm committed to placing their clients' interests ahead of their own. Their mission is to be a force of good in their relationships to make the most of their clients' investment, giving them the time and confidence to pursue their mission. Contact Daniel Wallach at www.wallachinvestments.com for more information. For the Obligation Radio Show, the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas, and the Carolina Media Network, my name is Jason Murphy. God bless, and Esto Vir.